On today's show, the Houston Rockets' disappearing act strikes once again as they've now lost their fifth straight game, this time to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Where's the identity of this team? Where's the defense? Who's their closer? And is Ime Udoka throwing a little bit of shade with some of his post-game comments? We're going to unpack it all right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Man, I miss winning basketball games. Losing games just stinks. What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Thursdays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Drop us a comment while you're there. Tell me what you think is going on with this Houston Rockets team. What's the biggest reason for this loss to the T-Wolves, 127-114? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Also, subscribe to the daily Locked On Rockets newsletter. Would sincerely appreciate that. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym, or if you're nursing your depression after a 5-game losing streak with this Rockets team. I miss winning basketball games. Talking about losses always stinks, and talking about multiple losses in a row stinks even more. And talking about the same damn fourth quarter collapses is the absolute worst. This Rockets team is one of the worst performing fourth quarter teams in the NBA. It's ridiculous. Like, if you could end the game after the third quarter, this Rockets team would be sitting pretty. That's the call we need to put into Adam Silver. Forget about shortening quarters from 12 minutes to 10 minutes. Let's just get rid of the fourth quarter entirely, and Rockets would be an all-time great team. Look, a lot that I want to talk about and unpack in today's show. I want to talk about the collapse in the fourth quarter, the offensive woes, the defensive woes. I want to get into Ime Udoka's post-game commentary as well. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but maybe him throwing a little bit of shade post-game. We'll get into a lot of stuff on today's show. And also be on the lookout. I completely forgot that the Rockets had a game after the NBA trade deadline. So we'll talk about the trade deadline stuff and some of the rumors and speculation and what the Rockets did ultimately wind up doing. What was your favorite Jaden Springer moment? Because he's no longer a member of the Houston Rockets. We'll talk about the moves they did make at the trade deadline and potentially their reported interest in adding Ben Simmons via the buyout market. So be on the lookout for that as our next episode. We'll unpack all that and also take a look around the NBA landscape and see kind of what the other teams look like. But let's start with the fact that the Rockets, once again, completely melted down in the fourth quarter. They led by 6 going into the fourth quarter, 98-92. And then over the next 8 minutes of game time, they proceeded to only put up 8 points. 8 minutes, 8 points. That is pretty abysmal, all things considered. And what's even funnier is even though they were only able to put up 8 points in 8 minutes, they were still very much in this game with about 4 minutes left to play. It was 110-106. At the end of that ridiculously poor start to the fourth quarter for this Rockets team. So they were very much still in it. It's not like even like putting up 8 points in 8 minutes is usually a death knell for any team, but they were still kind of in it before the Anthony Edwards like flamethrower just torched them to close out the game. And then, other guys started hitting shots and it was just kind of game over at that point. Ant hit a couple ridiculous deep 3-pointers. He was jawing with Dillon Brooks the whole time. And then Mike Conley hit a 3. Mike Conley hit actually a couple clutch buckets there at the end. It was just too much to handle at that point. But offensively, I want to focus on the offense first. Then I want to get into some of the defensive stuff. And then we'll get to Ime Udoka's comments. But this whole, and this is an Ime problem. It really is. This whole equal opportunity offense thing, and Dillon Brooks has talked about it, right? Sometimes you, sometimes me, always us. It works a lot of the time, and it's like a really feel-good notion of like, yeah, like, you know, we do things as a team, and we win as a basketball team, and there's no one player that's more important than the other. Except that's just not true. Like, every team needs to have a hierarchy. And the fact that this Rockets team does not have an established hierarchy, at least when Fred VanVleet's not out there, they really fail to adhere to any level, any semblance of a hierarchy, especially at the end of games, is just absolutely mind-boggling. In the fourth quarter, again, 8 points in 8 minutes, they only scored 16 points overall. Anthony Edwards literally matched the Rockets as a team, point for point. Ant scored 16 of his insane 41 points. He scored 16 of them in the fourth quarter, and that's how many points the Rockets scored in the fourth as a team. But in the fourth, Rockets 16 points, 3 of 13 shooting, only 1 of 7 from downtown. They were 9 of 12 at the free throw line, so they were getting to the free throw line. Alp, Jalen, and Ime all went 3 of 4 at the charity stripe, so 75%. That's decent. But they did have 4 turnovers as well. And they also weren't attacking the offensive glass at all. They only had 1 offensive rebound through the entire frame. This Rockets team, two things really stand out here. First off, they need some kind of offensive hierarchy, because for Alperen Sengun to have only attempted 1 shot in that fourth quarter, and the 1 shot he did get. So first off, he drew a bunch of fouls in a row on Rudy Gobert. He was putting him, he was working him over completely, drawing fouls, getting to the free throw line. And then he had one where he completely put Rudy in the spin cycle and then dunked it home. And after that shot happened with about 6 minutes left to go in the game. He didn't touch the ball. He didn't shoot the basketball the rest of the way, which is kind of absurd. The player who had the most shot attempts for the Rockets in the fourth quarter, Cam Whitmore, 5 attempts. That's a little ridiculous. That can't happen. Like, Cam is a nice spark plug energy guy off the bench, and he had a decent game in his own right, 16 points, 5 of 13 shooting, but he reverted a little bit back to some old Cam Whitmore tendencies in that fourth quarter. And I'm sorry, this is an Ime problem, but it's also a problem for the players on the court to recognize, hey, maybe, just maybe, we should get the basketball to our star player who, albeit had a pretty quiet game by his usual standards. Alp, 16 points, 10 boards, 7 assists, couple steals, couple turnovers. But he only had 11 shot attempts. He had less shot attempts than Jalen Green. Jalen Green had double the shot attempts of Alperen Sengun in this game, 22 to 11. Dillon Brooks had 13 field goal attempts to Alp's 11. Ime Thompson had 10 field goal attempts to Alp's 11. And Cam Whitmore had 13. In what world should Alperen Sengun be getting less shot attempts than 4 other players on the Rockets roster? I can't think of, 3 other players, and then 1 very close to Ime Thompson. I can't think of a reality where that happens, where your best player, your all-star, the guy who just was selected to the NBA All-Star team, is not prioritized down the stretch of games. However, I can't think of a reason as to why, and it's because Fred VanVleet's the only guy that can get Alp the ball in the spots that he wants it on the floor. Fred VanVleet's the only guy on the roster that can consistently hit that pocket pass to Alperen Sengun on the roll to make sure that he can get established post-ups late in the game, to make sure that they incorporate and involve him in all these different actions. Whereas other guys just break off and try to play a little hero ball. Maybe they get a screen and then they resort to some ISO play. Like, it's ugly basketball. It really is. And this team desperately needs Fred VanVleet to come back, because even when Fred's out there, the offensive hierarchy is still kind of a mess at times, but at least Fred is able to get the ball to the Rockets' best player and the closest thing they have to a closer. Because Jalen Green hasn't consistently been the closer for this team. Fred VanVleet hasn't consistently been the closer. Ime Thompson hasn't consistently been the closer. The closest thing the Rockets have to a closing presence, their best player on the team, is Alperen Sengun. And it's a travesty that they weren't able to get him more touches down the stretch of this game in order to try and nullify some of the offensive woes that they were facing. I want to add the caveat that I'm not giving Alp a hall pass, because the defensive side of things was abysmal in this game. This was one of his worst defensive performances all season long. And I want to talk about the defense here in just a moment and some ideas on what's plaguing this team on that side of the basketball and how they've gotten away from their identity as a physical, defensive-minded squad. I want to talk about that here in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Robinhood. With Robinhood Gold, you can now enjoy the VIP treatment, receiving a 3% IRA match on retirement contributions. The privileges of the very privileged are no longer exclusive. With Robinhood Gold, your annual IRA contributions are boosted by 3%, plus you also get 4% APY on your cash in non-retirement accounts. That's over 8 times the national savings average. The perks of the high net worth are now available for any net worth. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. To receive your 3% boost on annual IRA contributions, sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk, rate subject to change. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold at $5 per month for 1 year from first match. Must keep funds in IRA for 5 years. Go to Robinhood.com/boost. Over 8 times the national average savings account interest rate claim is based on data from the FDIC as of November 18th, 2024. Robinhood Financial LLC member SIPC. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold LLC. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. I glossed over this in the last segment, and I wanted to make sure to highlight this, but the offensive rebounding, I mentioned it there in the fourth quarter. The Rockets only had 1 offensive rebound that entire fourth quarter. They lost the second chance points battle to this Wolves team 26-16. And they lost the overall offensive rebound battle 18-12. And look, I think this feeds into some of the defensive issues that we're seeing as well. This Rockets team has just completely gotten away from their identity. And because of the identity that they had fostered for so much of the regular season, for so much of this season, where they had fought hard defensively, were one of the most physical teams in the NBA, and really got after it on the offensive boards, they allowed themselves a much greater margin for error, especially at the end of games. Because in a game like this, maybe earlier in the season where they put up only 16 points in the fourth quarter, it wouldn't have mattered if you put up 16 points, or I guess it wouldn't have mattered if you went through a stretch where you only scored, I don't know, what am I trying to say? Basically, by not generating those second and third chance opportunities, by not getting after it and attacking the offensive glass, you're seeing a team that is not afforded as many opportunities to make mistakes as consistently on the offensive side of the ball. Because right now, a lot of their offense in that fourth quarter was just one and done, right? You get one shot up and then that's it. Whereas earlier this season, they'd get 2, 3, sometimes 4 different looks at it. And when you're giving yourselves that many opportunities, even if you're one of the worst shooting teams in the NBA, eventually you're going to knock something down. And that's where the Rockets kind of made their bread and butter for so much of the season, was attacking the offensive glass and being relentless and really getting after it defensively. And they've just completely gotten away from any semblance of that identity, to where all of January and now bleeding into February, they've really relied on their offense to outscore opposing teams. And some nights it's worked, but other nights, this is not a good offensive team. This is not a great offensive team. This is not a great three-point shooting team. This is not a team that can rely on its offense consistently to beat other teams. And that's why we're seeing these losses. That's why we're seeing some really volatile play, including the 2 really bad losses against the Nets, because they just can't, you can't bank on your offense consistently with this squad. So I wanted to make sure to highlight that as kind of a major issue here before transitioning over to the defensive side of things. And man, why on God's green earth was Dillon Brooks the primary on Anthony Edwards in this game? Why? Like, make it make sense to me. I understand that the Wolves had a much bigger lineup than the Rockets to start, with Gobert and Naz Reid and the length of Jaden McDaniels out there in the starting lineup. The Rockets are oftentimes undersized against whatever team they play, because they're literally undersized at every single position on the floor right now as it currently stands. But I don't understand why you didn't start with Ime Thompson on Ant as like the primary defender. I understand that Dillon Brooks is supposedly this, the tone setter, defensive. He's not the team's best defender. it makes no sense to have DB checking Anthony Edwards. And that was super apparent from the start of this game because Ant caught fire early. 18 points in the first quarter alone. They tightened up a little bit in the second quarter, but it was just bad. And then down the stretch of this game, it didn't matter who was guarding him, but a bunch of those possessions happened on Dillon Brooks where Ant was just cooking for his 16 in the fourth quarter. I don't like the defensive game plan of sticking Dillon Brooks on the opposing team's best player. DB would have been giving up some height on Naz Reid for sure, but Ime Thompson should have been the primary on Anthony Edwards, it feels like. And I've had this realization, and it's been kind of creeping in for a little while now, but Ime Thompson has lost a little bit his gas, I think. Right? When he was coming off the bench previously, it was a lot easier for him to sustain his high intensity level of play for every single second that he was on the floor. But now that Ime Thompson has been fully inserted into the starting lineup and has been a starter for a little over a month now, I don't think we're seeing the same level of effectiveness from Ime Thompson, especially on the defensive side of the floor. He's still a phenomenal defender. Don't get it twisted. But there's a level of Ime's game that is reliant on his just unmatched intensity at times when he's locking in on a player, especially on the defensive side, that hasn't quite been there, I don't think, as consistently as it was previously when he was coming off the bench. And for this Rockets team to lose that edge that Ime Thompson provides, coupled with Dillon Brooks getting cooked by Ant and also antagonizing him. That's the other part, is Ant was, that's one guy that you don't want to try and antagonize, right? It's kind of like the whole Dillon Brooks, LeBron James thing is DB is, he's trying to get under your skin. He's trying to mess with you. He's trying to, get you, get inside your head, that kind of thing. And that doesn't work with Ant. Ant will talk trash back to you. Ant's probably the biggest trash talker in the entire NBA. And it fired him up. It got him going. And you could see it down the stretch of this game. Every bucket, every pull-up three, every time Ant scored, he was staring daggers into Dillon Brooks, talking to him the whole time. And that's not the move, right? Trying to piss off Ant, poking the bear, is not the move. And so I think that defensively, the Rockets did an okay job in the second and third quarters trying to slow down Ant. But that's when they were trapping him. That's when they were, forcing other guys to try and beat them. And down the stretch of this game, they allowed Ant to play one-on-one or to attack in space way too easily. And sometimes they sent doubles, right? Sometimes Alperen Sengun would try to blitz. And again, this was some of Alp's, I feel like, worst defense of the season because the Wolves were targeting Alp again and again and again in that fourth quarter. And time again, he was making defensive mistakes, whether it was miscommunications with it, whether he was supposed to switch or not. He had one possession where he was the Ime had tried to switch it and take Alp off of Rudy Gobert or off of Naz Reid, depending on who was in the game, in order to keep Alp out of the pick and roll actions. And there was one possession where Alp completely forgot about that and, had a miscommunication with Tari, and it led to a bucket because he didn't know whether he was supposed to be guarding the big or guarding Jaden McDaniels off on the wings. It was all over the place. One of the worst defensive quarters of the season for this Rockets team. And they got away from blitzing and double teaming Anthony Edwards, and they allowed him again to reel off 16 points there in the fourth quarter. I also want to note here, and I don't want to sit here and be like, oh, well, they're only losing because of injuries. But again, just like I mentioned Fred VanVleet and his importance in the first segment about the hierarchy and incorporating Alperen Sengun and how nobody else can provide what Fred provides for this team, at least not yet. Defensively, this team is desperately missing Jabari Smith Jr. They are. They're just flat out missing Jabari. And the way that Dillon Brooks has played as of late, I keep leaning more and more towards the idea of when Jabari is healthy and back, which Side note, in Minnesota, he was shooting warm-ups, and he's got the soft cast off of his left hand, so he should be progressing and ramping back up. I would not expect him back before the All-Star break, but hopefully he's ready to go post-All-Star break, because this team really, really needs him back and active on the floor. I don't know if Ime Udoka has the cachet to pull this move off, but I don't think the Rockets' best starting lineup includes Dillon Brooks anymore. I just don't see it. And maybe there's a world where, again, with the comment, with the thought that I shared about Ime Thompson and his intensity kind of waning a little bit in the starting lineup, some of that's just because he's been playing so many minutes, right? He's been racking up the most minutes of pretty much any starter on a nightly basis since entering the starting lineup. But I do really wonder if there's a world where Ime would consider starting Jabari over Dillon Brooks, because the only other alternative then, in order to get Jabari back out there and get what he provides, which is size, length, shooting, rebounding, defensive versatility, all of the things that he brings to the table, which very clearly this Rockets team has been missing since their defense has kind of completely fallen off a cliff, and that directly coincided with losing Jabari Smith Jr. in the lineup. I think the best version of this Rockets lineup is probably Fred, Jalen, Ime, Jabari, Sengun. But I don't know if Ime has the stones to pull Dillon Brooks out of the starting lineup mid-season. And I don't know how DB would react to that. I think DB's a pro, and he would handle it like a pro. But maybe it has to be a situation where Ime just has to go back to the bench and goes back to the iteration of this team that we saw early on, where they had the Terror Twins checking on off the bench, and that energy, that momentum shift of being able to go to Tari and Ime off the bench really did carry the Rockets through a good chunk of the early part of this season. And maybe going back to that is the best recipe to get back to some of the early season success, where you need this team to be locked in on a nightly basis. You need them to have more energy than the other team. You need them to play harder than the other team. And they haven't done that. Literally, it's been 5 games in a row now where they have not played harder than the other team, staring them down. And this Rockets team, who's built their entire identity on playing hard, if you can't do that on a night in, night out basis, which maybe there's diminishing returns on it too. Maybe they're unable to maintain that level of intensity over the course of an entire 82 game season. And that's why we're seeing some slippage, which is reminiscent of the slippage that we saw last season. The Rockets started to fade a little bit right before the All-Star break last year. And it might just be that this brand of basketball, this high-intensity, physical brand of basketball, is just too hard to maintain over an entire 82-game season. Who knows? But coming up, I do want to talk about Ime Udoka's post-game commentary, potentially him throwing some shade at both his players and maybe the front office. We're going to talk about that in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Looking for tickets to your next big event, whether it's a concert, comedy show, or a sports game, finding the right ticket at the right price can be a bit of a headache sometimes. With the Game Time picks, it's never been easier. Let me tell you how it works. With Game Time picks, the app does all the hard work for you. It curates the best deals, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of different ticketing offers. I've been using Game Time picks for a minute now, and here's why I love it. The curated deals make it super simple to find great tickets at a great price. No more sifting through tons of different options. Recently, I used the super deal for a awesome set of seats to an upcoming Rockets game. Couldn't believe the value. It was a total steal. They've got views from your seat, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive to your venue, which might not matter if you're a diehard Rockets fan, you've been to Toyota Center a ton, but it's really helpful if you're going to a comedy club or a concert or whatever. You don't really know what to expect if you've never been to a venue before. And the best part, you're covered with Game Time's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they'll refund 110% of the difference. Plus, your tickets are guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options if something comes up. Take the guesswork out of buying your tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And the final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. I want to give a quick shout out to Jock Landale, who had one of his better games, maybe quite possibly his best game of the season. Despite it being a loss, he was really productive in his minutes. 10 points, was perfect from the floor, 4 of 4, knocked down a 3, had 5 rebounds, had an assist in there. finished a team best +5 in his minutes on the court. Only 11 minutes played, but he and Reed Shepherd were the only positive plus minuses for this Rockets squad. And Jock really did, he was solid in Steven Adams' absence there in his 11 minutes run. He had 14 minutes to run. I apologize. But just wanted to give him a quick shout out because Jock does not always get the most love. And sometimes, when he has to step up with no Steven Adams, it's good to see him be able to produce in those minutes. Let's throw it to Ime Udoka and what he had to say after this game when asked about Anthony Edwards and his play in this one specifically.
Extremely soft on him, and he got way too comfortable. Didn't follow the game plan as far as how we wanted to guard him, and went under a bunch of pick and rolls early. Obviously, he's number one in the league in attempted threes off the dribble and percentage-wise, so let him get in the rhythm there, obviously. 18 early in the first half, 8 free throws first quarter, so got after it better in the second quarter. He only had 3 points there, went after him a little bit, but when we went after him fourth, couldn't trap him, couldn't guard him one-on-one, couldn't get through pick and rolls, and so it's nice to have a special player that can get buckets at the end.
All right, and that wasn't the only comment that Ime had post-game. He also had this to say.
The identity we kind of formed was being a tougher team, aggressive team, and now we look like one of the softest teams in the league.
Okay, so a couple different comments from Ime there. First off, I agree with the second comment. The Rockets do look like they're playing soft basketball right now. They don't look like the same physical team from earlier this season. Now, there's a chunk of Rockets fans in looking at kind of the discourse taking place after this game. There's a ton of Rockets fans that are angry and upset with Ime Udoka. And I do not for even 1 second consider myself like an Ime defender or an Ime truther or anything. But really? You're going to be mad at Ime? Like, for the guy who, I can't say single-handedly, but is responsible for this turnaround, for making this team the third best team and one of the best teams at one point in the entire NBA this season. Yeah, they've hit a bit of a rough patch, and that directly coincides with missing some very key players in Jabari Smith Jr. and Fred VanVleet and even Alperen Sengun for a few games there. So I don't want to crazy overreact to this 5-game losing streak, but at the same time, people who are suddenly out on Ime because of XYZ reasons, first off, grow up. I'm just going to throw that out there. Ime has his problems. Ime's not a perfect head coach. Absolutely. And there's definitely moments where I look at something that Ime's done, whether it's rotations or whether it's, I talked about it in the first segment, right? This whole equal opportunity offense. I hate that. I hate that mentality so much. I honestly despise it. I think it's one of the worst, it's not a horrible basketball philosophy, but it's a horrible basketball philosophy at the end of a close game when you really need guaranteed buckets, when you need high level offense, when you need to go through your best players. You want the ball in your best players' hands. And so I really don't understand the frustration with Ime. I get it. The offense needs to be better. And the main complaint that I continue seeing is, that Ime says the same thing after every loss, that he says, oh, we weren't physical enough. We didn't, do this. We didn't play hard enough, bad energy. A lot of it is coach speak. Absolutely. If you listen around the NBA to the other 29 coaches, you'll hear a lot of the similar stuff. I don't know if you're only paying attention to Rockets games, but a lot of coaches use coach speak all the time. It's not a secret. But that being said, Ime also calls a spade a spade. And I think it's perfectly fair. If you've watched this Rockets team over these last 5 games, I don't think what he's saying is wrong. This is not the same Rockets team that's played as one of the best defenses all season long. This is not the same Rockets team that has crushed the offensive glass and generated all those second and third chance opportunities. This is not the same Rockets team that has been the most physical team in the NBA for the last 5 games. It's not. They've lost their edge. They've lost their confidence. And maybe your argument is that Ime needs to do a better job of lifting up his players rather than, I don't know, quote unquote, throwing them under the bus at the end of the game. But Ime's not the one out there playing. He can't control how much effort they give on a night-to-night basis. He can't control how hard they play. And at the end of the day, if they're playing at 100% effort and intensity and energy and they still lose games, I can live with that. I can. And Ime will live with that. Ime said it before in post when it's been a hard fought game where he felt his team did everything they could to try and win, where they didn't take the foot off the gas pedal, all that, and it just came down to maybe the shots didn't go in or the other team just played a little bit better. That's fine. Those are livable losses. But can you seriously sit here and look me in the eye as I'm looking down the camera, and if you can say with a straight face that this Rockets team has played with the maximum amount of effort and desire and fight and want to over this 5-game losing streak, you're lying to yourself. They haven't. They maybe the Knicks game. Maybe the Knicks game. I'll give them that. That Knicks game was a very hard-fought game, and they had Brunson able to take over at the end. But this has been a recurring theme now where, look at the Grizzlies game. They had Jaren Jackson Jr. take over down the stretch. Look at the Knicks game. They had Jalen Brunson take over down the stretch. Look at this Wolves game now. They had Anthony Edwards take over down the stretch. And so Ime's comment there in the clip that I played, not the soundboard clip, but the actual video clip, where he highlighted, it's nice to have a special player who can take over games at the end. I can't help but wonder if that's a little bit of shade being thrown by Ime Udoka, because the Rockets were absolutely in play for Kevin Durant ahead of this trade deadline. And it's no secret that Ime Udoka wants to win basketball games and wants to win games at the very highest level. And Ime's been fantastic for the growth and development of the young core, and he's helped accelerate many of their careers, and he's embraced Alperen Sengun as the team's best player, albeit still, frustrating how he gets utilized or doesn't get utilized at the end of games. But I can't help but wonder if there's a little bit of frustration there where he himself knows that this team has a certain ceiling that they're going to run into if they haven't already hit that ceiling, because they just don't have that number one true alpha star player to go to down the stretch of a close game. Alp has his limitations, and clearly he's still, I won't say overly dependent on Fred VanVleet, but he's a big man, and he needs a lead guard to be able to set him up. And that lead guard to this point has not consistently been Jalen Green. There's some games where they click really well and their chemistry's off the charts and their two-man game looks incredible. And then there's other games like this where you wonder why Alp only took one shot in 8 minutes of run in the fourth quarter. So there's limitations on getting the ball to Alp, getting the ball to your best player, right? And going through him. Jalen Green isn't ready to consistently be the closer for this Rockets team. And he's shown that at various points throughout the season, right? When the defense ratchets up, when pressure is there at the end of a game, sometimes he's been able to deliver and other times he hasn't. And I wonder if Ime's showing a little bit of frustration now in thinking that, man, I could have had KD on this squad, right? Could have had KD with all these great defenders, and that would have been our closer. And that's been, that to this point, more than any other issue this season, has been the Rockets' biggest Achilles heel, is they don't have a legitimate closer. They don't have a guy that they can just give the ball to and say, go get us a bucket at the end of a game. And in today's NBA, you need a guy like that. You need a guy like that to win close games in the regular season. You need a guy like that to win in the postseason. And that, as I sit here on, it's early February, right? Saying this, postseason is a couple months away, but I can almost guarantee you that whatever will be the end of the Houston Rockets postseason run, depending on what a postseason run looks like for this team, that is going to be the biggest issue that we have to discuss this offseason, is going to be they don't have a closer. They don't have a star-level player who can step up and make plays consistently down the stretch of a game to take over, like we saw Jaren Jackson Jr. do, like we saw Jalen Brunson do, like we saw Anthony Edwards do. And that's not a slight to Alperen Sengun. It is a guard-driven league. And 9 times out of 10, the guys that you see taking over down the stretch of these games, they are guard players. They're guard or perimeter players. They're perimeter-oriented. They handle the rock. They attack from the perimeter. They isolate. They run pick and roll. They find a mismatch. They hunt. And they're able to create opportunities for their teams that way, or score the basketball on their own that way. And the Rockets don't have that guy. And it feels like Ime is a little frustrated by that. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. Maybe I'm not. I'm curious your thoughts. Let me know how you feel after this Timberwolves game. And I'll tell you what, things don't get any easier because they're about to have to go on the road to deal with the Dallas Mavericks for a midday tip-off Saturday afternoon, where apparently the Mavs fans, it's their first home game after the Luka Doncic trade. They're apparently planning a protest outside of the arena ahead of the game, so that should be a total zoo. So be on the lookout for that, clips and social media, stuff from that game. With that, I do want your thoughts. I want your comments. Remember, the best way to help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform you're choosing. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Drop those comments while you are there. Subscribe to the daily Locked On Rockets newsletter. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.